ULF. We have done it. We have done it.
Okay. Now we are really live. I actually got a message from LinkedIn that it took them a second, but yeah. Hello and welcome to the first episode of the vCF Musketeers. Hello, Toby. Long time no see.
Long time no see. Hi, Yves.
So we actually run this across the globe today because I'm actually sitting in Palo Alto and you're sitting near Vienna.
Vienna, yes.
So as this is kind of the first episode of our new series, before we get into the whole story on why are we doing this and how are we doing this, I think it makes sense to do a little round of introductions. Heading over to you, Toby. Maybe you introduce yourself and then I take over for myself.
Thank you, Yves. Yeah, Tobias Barschek, cloud architect at comdivision, mainly in the networking and traditional compute part, but also a little bit in the Kubernetes world. Yeah, one of the lead architects for the whole vCF story.
You were one of the first instructors as well, I think, in EMEA and some of the other things on vCF. And you did some pretty decent sized vCF deployments over the last couple of years. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's well.
So you went through all the pain, so that a lot of our audience users do not need to actually go through that pain again, and actually they can.
I know what was there in the version 3 already. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So then, yeah, my name is Yves Sanford, founder and CEO of the comdivision group. I'm also, I'm not sure if I should actually call a retired VCDX by now or something like that, but they would force me to actually do another exam on ARIA automation, and I'm more the cloud director guy, and I did my VCDX on cloud director, so I'm still trying to figure out if I'm actually going to redo that, but I'm going to wait until Broadcom announces what's going to happen to all the certifications in the first place. I do primarily cloud architecture as well. I'm more coming in on the last couple of years from a business side to really evaluate why are we using and doing certain things from a business perspective. But I also helped, similar to what Toby did for certain service providers, I helped write the reference architecture for one of the largest US service providers, together with some folks from VMware. On the vCF side. So we have altogether done quite a few things. And also we in comdivision actually are working on all kinds of migration passes at the moment because it becomes more and more clear for customers. It's not only that new deployments are vCF, you somehow need to get your workloads over. Before we really get into the vCF Musketeers, I think it's we wanted to quickly cover a bit about what is our idea behind this? Because you might have seen myself talk a lot about the Broadcom acquisition of VMware. What are the consequences for customers, partners, etc.? Toby did a complete series in the last couple of weeks already talking about licensing tools and things like that. And we thought it's time to really get our hands dirty, or however we want to call it, and actually do some more live integration scenarios. So we are going to basically, with this whole series, the idea is we are going to start off from nothing. And virtually, we are going to design through different scenarios of vCF. We are going to go through the configuration book and everything like that. And then finally, we are going to really get our hands dirty and actually do a live deployment. Those are going to be several episodes. The idea behind this is also we are going to run this openly on different live channels, so you can follow it along on the comdivision channels. There is the dedicated Twitch channel for the vCF Musketeers. It's an open format. We decided that we are not going to utilize a webinar or something else. This is not that we are going to run this to collect customer data or anything else. We want to keep this as open as possible so anyone can attend, whether you are an end user, whether you're a service provider, whether you're potentially another reseller, implementation partner, or even someone from VMware. You can throw in your questions throughout the session and let us know what you think, what your questions are. We can have open discussions about architecture topics during the sessions, and because this should be as interactive as possible. So utilize the chat functions and everything else in all the different platforms so that we can get you as much knowledge across from all of these topics as you like. You can also always ping us on any of the social media platforms and try to reach out to us if you have any questions. It's really, we actually thought like what we did in the early days, many years ago, more for vCops and vCAC. Back then, not so much with streaming, but with videos. We wanted to do something similar for vCF now that it is basically the go-to and standard platform of VMware moving forward. Anything I forgot, Toby?
No, not from my part. As you mentioned, we are also available if you would like to join a session. Yeah, why not? So as Yves already mentioned, it should be an open round. It will be an open round. It should be an open discussion. So also, if you would like to join, feel free to send us a message, and we try to get you into the stream as well. Yeah, and as you just mentioned, it will be the platform of choice for the future. So we should have a look into the whole vCF game and how it is really built up, and also what are the consequences of using vCF. From time to time, there are consequences.
Yes, and as much as we will be allowed, we will also try to share with you already what we know about upcoming versions and everything else, because one thing becomes more and more clear, as I'm currently in Palo Alto, actually, on the VMware campus, it becomes more and more clear that Broadcom is really, as we expected, as both Toby and I said in several videos before, Broadcom is heavily working at the moment to really tighten the product integrations and solve one of the biggest complaints from many large-scale customers in the last couple of years is that the product integrations within VMware products was highly complex. And vCF did not solve everything. And I think moving forward, we'll see exactly that. So whenever someone is going to complain there are no new features, potentially look behind the visor and actually see what is all being done to actually make all of it work much better from a background perspective.
This is what we clearly can see, and I think this is something we can say already as well. I would say the next releases of the whole vCF will just be fixing releases to get all of the stuff solved, bring in the whole final features of vSAN 8, of ESA, OSA, stretch cluster and stuff like this. So I would say in the next couple of sessions or in the next couple of releases of vCF, and then we will also do a session as well. I would expect that we clearly can say, hey, okay, this is now fixed, that is now fixed, and stuff like this.
Yeah. Good. So that being said, we don't want to actually talk too much about the channel itself, but actually get into the baseline. I think before we get into the configuration Excel, I think the first main decision you will have to do for yourself when you are going to deploy vCF, even though it's a pretty pre-designed solution, it's the initial things. It's like there is always a discussion within VMware what was first, VVD, VCF, or whatever. Doesn't matter in the end. Both of that is pretty near to each other, and you can have lengthy discussions whether you like the way it is designed or whether you don't like the way it is designed. It is what it is, and this is, we need to make the best out of it what we can do on our infrastructure. The advantages of having central upgrade and lifecycle management is clearly helping to overlook some of the limitations, which I always will have if I have a standardized deployments. It's like in a comparison, it's what I did in one interview is where I said it's like the vCF is more like a standard house or anything else you get. It's nothing fancy like an architect's dream building, which is highly complex, typically very expensive. But when you look in the real estate scenario, if you want to threaten away a realtor, then you tell him it's an architect's dream house, because that typically is a house which is very hard to sell because it was done for one exact purpose and not for anything else. And in modern times, enterprises need something more than just a solution which just works for one specific scenario. Nevertheless, one of the first scenarios you will have to get yourself into is vCF, more or less. It does not force you to actually have a dedicated management cluster, but one of the first discussions you will need to have with yourself is like, will I actually have a management cluster, or will I actually utilize my first cluster for both management and workload domains?
Yeah, that's one of them. In the past it was a one-shot decision. So in the past it was the problem that you if you decided to say, okay, I go with a dedicated management, everything fine. But also if you selected, hey, I would like to have a collapsed management and workload domain, you haven't been really able to change this. This is not something which is fixed since version 4 something. So from now you can really start with a collapsed management domain. So having your workload stuff and your management stuff on the same vSphere environment, on the same software-defined data center stack. But and then afterwards, if you figure out, hey, okay, I'm still growing, I have more workload coming in, I would like to have a dedicated workload domain. This is something which can be now changed as well.
Yeah, you can change this now as well. And as you said, it's like, and one of the things is you should clearly also, as always, look at the maximum configuration values and things like that. But let's face it, at least when we look at European customers, there are not going to be that many European customers who at least hit the maximum values when it comes down to VMs or things like that. One important thing which you need to keep in mind, and based on the latest license changes, I'm having the feeling that that is not going to go away that fast anymore, is your management cluster, at least the primary storage, has to be vCF.
Yes. I would clearly say absolutely right. This is something which will not go away. I know from roughly one month or 2 months before the deal finally was closed, there was a surprising license available for vCF calling vCF without vSAN. So also for the management domain. So I would say that maybe there was some plans from VMware to enable vCF also from a management domain without vSAN. But we can already clearly say, hey, no, this will not be possible in the future anymore, because vSAN is the way to go. Also from a licensing perspective, to be honest, when we have a look at the vCF licensing, vSAN is there and it is included.
And that's exactly the point. As you said, it's like we have vCF with vSAN automatically included in the system. And this is also, I had a lengthy discussion the other day on one of my other social media channels where someone said, it's like, yeah, but it's now very, very expensive to utilize the VMware stack because I'm forced to utilize vCF with vSAN and NSX and everything. Where I said, it's like, yes, what you need to consider, whether you like it or not from that perspective, is that you are actually going to have vSAN and NSX included. And there are two ways on how you can deal with that situation. On one hand, I can say it's like, I'm still going to utilize my, let's say, legacy storage platform, and I'm still going to utilize the network services my physical network infrastructure gives me or my virtual appliances give me because I don't want to work with NSX. That's clearly a possibility. But it does not take you out of the equation that you are still going to pay for it. It is a bit like what Microsoft does in several other cases. And again, I'm not saying that it's a good way. And if you want to actually go down the rabbit hole of actually discussing that all of this is bad and not good, there are tons of Reddit channels where you can actually run up and down on it. It's not going to change it at the moment. So let's work with what we have. And with what we have is you should strategize that you are actually going to utilize vSAN and NSX in your infrastructure, same as utilizing ARIA operations and tools like that. But also, as you are moving along in this new world, you should think about the fact that you are actually going to optimize your infrastructure from a core perspective. For the enterprise commercial customers, it's actually not changing that much in general because you were always socket licensed, and the sockets then had limits on cores, and some of the vCF Plus licenses, etc., were already core-based. But for those who come out of the service provider field, it's a completely new ball game because they come out of RAM licensing and now need to do optimization for core. But we covered all of that in all the other episodes and sessions already. So We have to decide whether we are going to do collapsed or dedicated management cluster. And you can at a later point in time, if, for example, you say it's like, hey, my company is currently growing, we want to start with a collapse scenario, you can at a later point, as Toby correctly said, you can actually traverse out of there, create a workload domain, and actually make it work from there. So that's all possible.
Which brings me to an interesting topic, or brings us to an interesting topic, because everyone always complaining, yeah, but vCF is only for the big, large customers. You just need 4 hosts from a starting perspective. So you can ramp up your whole vCF stack with just 4 hosts. And as you just mentioned, in a collapsed environment, okay, 4 hosts with the whole management stuff, and then I can already start with my traditional virtualization.
And to be realistic, when you look at it from a vSAN perspective, having a vSAN cluster with less than 4 hosts is technically possible, but we have always been telling customers to stick away from it, because if you need to do maintenance, you need to put one host in maintenance mode, and then basically you still have 3 left. So if one would fail, you would still be fine with vSAN. If you're actually running a vSAN cluster with just 3 hosts, you're in maintenance and something happens, you're doomed. So there has always been, and then even many in the early days of vSAN, Duncan and everybody else made tons of posts about, and Cormac and everybody else is like, about the fact why 4 is the absolute minimum for a vSAN cluster in the first place. So you need to work with it. You also need to adjust a bit on how you're going to buy CPUs in the future, because that kind of influences now with the whole core licensing a bit on how you're going to do it. But I'm totally with you. There is a good use case for vCF for smaller deployments as well. What for me is unclear, but that's more a licensing question, how this is going to run in the future for large enterprise customers, whether they will only get vCF license keys for everything and they don't even get VVF keys or something else. That's still all up in the air. You get so many mixed messages, even here directly in the headquarters, that I'm going to stick out of that discussion at the moment. And
I would say at the moment licensing will be running on it will be a subscription license. This is what we clearly can say, but everything else we have to wait. What really is the outcome of the next couple of weeks?
Yes, but expect that you will also, so we actually have in the next couple of days a few meetings to get some of the add-on licensing cleared. So we hope that we get kind of like a release allowance so that we can actually create a bunch of videos about what we actually get here. Because the message we got from Broadcom also, and really more from a Broadcom leadership perspective, not only from a VMware perspective, is that they really support what we do in all our social media channels. So we got a very clear message for that, is that they really like what we are doing. They also totally accept that we are sometimes criticizing them for some of the decisions they take, but that it's really that there is full management support behind whatever we do.
Mm-hmm.
Or did you post a video which actually brings me into a new meeting, Toby?
No. But yes, sometimes we need to talk the truth.
Yeah, and that's fine, as long as it's, and I think that's the important part, is like even Broadcom can work with that as long as you can explain why it is. And I mean, I had several customers, and then we get finally into the Excel spreadsheet and the configuration details. I had several meetings with customers now with Broadcom, even meetings with customers and Hock, and it's not that they are not listening to the complaints and to the issues customers have with the licensing model and everything else, but they can also very well articulate is like why they are doing that, how they see solutions for these specific customer scenarios. And to be honest, every time I have been in any of these meetings, it's like there was a workable solution coming out at the end. So it's not that they are just actually is like, yeah, we are going to dictate all of this and all of this, how it's actually being read in some media. And I just recorded a video just yesterday because there was one article saying it's like, VMware killed 56 products. It's like, no, they did not kill them. They just actually rearranged them in a suite. But it's like, because it said in the article, NSX was actually ripped out. It's like, hang on a second. So clear the FUD out of all the media channels you have out there. But nevertheless, so I have to take the decision between my whether I'm going to go consolidated or whether I'm going to actually go with dedicated workload clusters. I also need to think about the fact whether I'm going to work stretched or not, because if I'm working stretched, that actually changes currently a bit of the vSAN set of vSAN options I have, and it's also going to need more hosts.
Absolutely, and this is the part where still there, to be honest, as we just mentioned, we will talk the truth, or we will talk also from time to time maybe where the product is lacking of features, because as you just mentioned, Yves, if I would say, okay, I would like to start with a stretched solution right from the beginning, I automatically come from 4 hosts, I go automatically up to 8, because what's the only solution at the moment behind vCF is saying, okay, 4 is my minimum for my management domain. So the plan or the idea behind having a stretched management domain is I have 4 hosts in data center A, 4 hosts in data center B, and I can switch over, I can fail over always the whole management domain. But there is no option saying, but I would like to go with a V3 or with a whatever solution 2.2, but to be honest, 2.2 would never be a working solution from my point of view. So if we say, hey, we go with a stretched management domain, we need to ramp up from 4 hosts up to 8. And as always, but this is also something which is not part of the vCF story. This is more or less part of every kind of cluster. And this time about the vSAN cluster, we need to have a third data center location or a third location where we can place our witness VM or the witness host. It must not be a VM. It can also be a dedicated ESXi. Or we go, as just mentioned, with the vSAN witness appliance, and then have really the capability of having a stretched management domain already from the beginning. And this is also something which is at the moment, let's call it critical or essentials from a starting perspective. If you decide to say, hey, I would like to have stretched workload domains, and we haven't talked about workload domains until now, but if you would like to have stretched workload domains afterwards, you always need to stretch your management domain. Otherwise, it will not be possible. So it is at the moment. So clearly talking about version 5.1, at the moment, I can only stretch my workload domains if I have already a stretched management domain.
Yes, but I remember I had customer discussions like that in the US. And to be honest, I mean, yes, I can imagine why I want to have this to save costs and a few other things. But in reality, from a real... And yes, the argument is my workload domains, like my ERP systems or something else, are going to continue to run even though my management cluster dies. I'm still not a big fan of any kind of setup where I have a stretched workload and a non-stretched management domain. So
yeah, absolutely. So if I go with a stretched approach for whatever kind of reason, talking about European customers, we know it from always mainly from European side, that we try to fix the region problem with a stretched solution, and not talking about the availability zones and stuff like this. We know the American approach. They clearly say, hey, stretching is a good idea, but I have one data center on the East Coast and the other data centers on the West Coast. Stretching will not work. So then we need to think about how we can do a disaster recovery, whatever. But yeah, absolutely on your side, if we start with stretching, we stretch the management domain and we stretch the workload domain, because and this is something we need to have in mind in the future, because this is the nature of vCF. All of my management components, independent if it is a management component for a workload domain or if it is a management component for the management domain, is running in the management domain. So there will not be a vCenter running on top of a workload cluster. Everything related to management will run in my management domain. Also, the whole ARIA suites and stuff like this.
And keep in mind what we just figured out, what changed with VCD 10.5 or something else, where manual restart is not allowed. You need to restart components via vCenter because otherwise OVF injection is not actually working. I'm not sure how many other VMware products are actually affected by this, because typically they are reusing the same code base for other things. So I'm not sure if we see similar release notes sooner or later on other products, and then it makes it even more important that your management domain is really rock solid and stable.
Rock solid,
but
absolutely.
Yeah, but I think those are your main design decisions points at the beginning. The other things is, which we keep mentioning, and it's really not a vCF thing, clusters should be as homogeneous as possible. So you should have the same hardware config. It does not need to be the same hardware vendor necessarily, but I mean, I don't necessarily get why you would want to mix that. But and because mixing different CPUs, I could potentially see. But if you just actually have 4 Lenovo and 4 HPE hosts, for example, with the same CPUs and memory sizing and the same disks for a vSAN configuration, yes, you can do that. But basically, the whole argument of having something like that would normally be that I'm no longer vendor agnostic, which you would still be, because you still have the same CPU. I would say 80 or 90% of the mainboard is going to be identical, and everything else. So you're not winning anything, except you add complexity.
And also with the whole LCM, so vCenter Lifecycle Manager, it more and more becomes really tough if you mix up hardware and also vendors. So the vCenter Lifecycle Manager becomes more and more the major or the main component for setting up clusters, for ramping up the whole stuff. So please, as Yves just mentioned, do not try to mix everything and anything around. So stay on a homogeneous setup.
Yeah. So that also means, as you are planning clusters for the future, is worst case, if one cluster is basically, if you can't get that hardware anymore, you are just going to create a new workload domains. It is that way. It's please don't actually come up with other ideas. It's going to force you into a more clean infrastructure. On the other hand, you have a lot of advantages for Broadcom, because it's promised that you will get access to different or to a higher quality support, customer success, and everything else. But so those are some of the basic requirements. And I mean, there is a long list in the requirements guide in regards to networking and everything else, but we more or less will come to each one of these areas as we go through the configuration Excel, which is more or less your main building point after you have taken some of the basic decisions about how your vCF structure is going to look like.
I would say so, yes, absolutely, because that's my starting point for more or less everything. It comes with a nice looking welcome screen. So this is what it looks like today, still with the old copyright. So I guess someone needs to update this as soon as possible. But just kidding, it is the Excel spreadsheet comes from a starting perspective, telling you what you need to do. So it is the outcome from the worksheet builder. So there is also a dedicated Excel summarization available where you see all of the stuff. So, but the outcome always will be the deployment Excel, where you have all of the necessary, or where you need to bring in all of the necessary information. So the question is, should we have a look into the planning and preparation workbook as well, or should we start with the deployment Excel?
I think we should have a look into the planning and preparation workbook as well, so that people actually get to see what it looks like.
Okay.
And maybe, Toby, you could also point out to everybody, it's like, where do you get them?
Yeah, for sure. That's not a big deal. Let's see if the site is working. That's maybe the more interesting part. So normally you should be able to go to myvmware.com, accept the cookies, try to log in. At the moment, sometimes the customer connect is not working as expected, but it looks good for today. I would say maybe there are some migrations happening in the background. So for the next 30 seconds, maybe I will be a little bit compromised. And then we go to downloads. And on the downloads, we have the VMware Cloud Foundation. Maybe I'm blind. There it is. And under drivers and tools, no, sorry, on the Cloud Foundation itself, as always, we have the Cloud Builder Appliance, we have the Cloud Parameter Guide for, so that's the Excel spreadsheet we have just seen. So that's the part where you can download the parameter Excel, and the other Excel is available.
The deployment parameter guide, isn't it the one below? Oh no, that's for VxRail. Yeah, okay. So
that's the one that's the same more or less, but just for VxRail, because there is still a deeper integration between not a deeper integration, an integration between vCF and VxRail available. And so for getting the other Excel, we need to have a look, because, to be honest, resources and facts, there they are.
And so just to be sure, we will put the links in the YouTube channel and put them in the comments below the video later on, so that you can actually more easily find it. Because again, that was after my first days around vCF. That was, yeah, you didn't use a private window. We will put the notes we will put it in the show notes later on. But it's important to know where you can find them and how you can find them, and that you always work with the newest ones, as long as you're going to deploy on the newest versions. So that's a good part from that perspective. So did you open the planning and preparation workbook already?
Give me a second. Give me a second.
That were already 5.
Yeah, just tell a joke from my
youth. No. We try to be at least somehow politically correct. So I could show you how I walk on water, but that's even not politically correct at the moment. And those who know. Those who know. And those who don't know will never know.
So I have now a private window, and now I have the spreadsheet, and it flies in the next couple of seconds.
You should clean up your desktop.
Nope. Nope. That's not working. So here we are with the brand.
You get a new notebook if you don't find anything anymore, isn't it? It's like the old ashtray thing with the cars. And
let's just zoom in a little bit, because otherwise it really becomes hard to read. So here we are. This is the world famous planning and preparation workbook for the vCF story. So also here, the outcome should be that you will be able to bring in or to fill in all of the necessary information to the deployment Excel. So the planning and preparation workbook is just a guide where you what are the needed information you need to get before you can really fill out the deployment Excel. The deployment Excel should be the outcome of the planning and preparation workbook. So from a starting perspective, yeah.
This is also the one where you do a bit of a, let's say, high-level validation if the configuration you are having in mind is actually going to work in the first place.
Yeah, I would say so. That this is something, for the more or less for the deployment workshops, they say, okay, what are our options? What needs to be defined? And what is there? So as you can see, you have inputs, you have deployments, you have references. So a huge set of information is there. What you can do, what you should do, what you should not do, and what you would like to exclude or include into your deployment.
Yeah. So I think it's that's what it always keeps up to, is like what I always also tell people is, if you want to get actually to understand the different options you have with vCF and everything else, is it's in the beginning, it's not so much about having a physical lab. It's actually in the beginning is get used to these Excel spreadsheets, because they are a good example, or not a good example. They help you understand how a lot of design decisions and everything else are driven within vCF. Because as long as you don't understand these Excel spreadsheets, it's going to be very hard to do a hardware design or anything else around this, because this is not, they are non-negotiable, let's call it that way. So at least the initial deployment has to be done the way the configuration spreadsheets are actually expecting them to happen. That does not mean that you cannot change things, but also what you always need to keep in mind, if you change things from how they are designed initially, that does not necessarily mean it's going to be upgradable anymore, or it's still going to be manageable from a lifecycle management perspective and stuff like that. And so, yeah.
And also be aware, the deployment, the planning and preparation spreadsheet is already referencing only to version 4.5, 5.0, and 5.1. So yes, technically you still can download all the versions, but I assume, maybe I have a little bit of inside information, but I assume that the version 4, the prior version 4.5 versions will be going end of life a little bit earlier. Just to inform you.
I'm totally with you. I'm expecting that we will see for a lot of products that Broadcom is going to try to get the end of support and end of life scenarios in a much shorter time fashion, so that it actually becomes more, again, as we will utilize vCF, as we are going to utilize lifecycle management and things like that, it's going to be easier to keep up to date anyway. And it's going to be a bit of a training for a lot of customers to really get to use these methodologies of staying in the current version.
So let's have a look into it. So select your version you would like to utilize. Select the multi-instance integration model. So are we talking about your first domain, or are we talking about an additional domain? So if you select the first domain, automatically vSAN will be there. For an additional domain, you can use whatever you would like to use as your principal storage. So talking about NFS, talking about iSCSI. To be honest, with iSCSI, we will have a quick look into it, because by iSCSI we need to have something in mind. Talking about fiber channels. So this is the idea behind the first domain and the additional domain, that we then get the capability of selecting different storage types as well. But for the first domain, as we already mentioned, it will be always vSAN. So vSAN will be the principal storage of our first domain. And as soon when it comes to vSAN, we have the capability of utilizing the Express storage architecture, Express or Enterprise? Now, Express storage architecture, or the originating storage architecture, so the old originating vSAN storage, or the new, which is only backed by NVMe disks. So if you are just thinking at the moment, saying, okay, since we need to go, or we would like to go to vSAN related to the vCF story, I would highly recommend to go with ESA, because it is the future. But if you have a current up and running environment, and you say, hey, We are already utilizing vSAN, but we have an OSA cluster. Okay, then we start with an OSA.
Plus, there is the limitations on stretched.
And at the moment, there is a limitation on the stretched. But also there, it is already fixed in vSAN, but not in vCF. But yeah, this is something we would clearly can say, it will be moved out in the future.
So for the lifecycle manager, can you quickly unfold it? This is basically how you are going to update your vSphere infrastructure later on. It's only going to be images at the moment.
It will be, and to be honest, it will be the final solution from a vSphere perspective as well. So also there, it has been announced since, was it vSphere 6.5 something already, where the old update manager has been starting to get, now 6.7 was the first. Was the first version where it was announced that the update manager will be moved out, and we will go more and more to an image-based management. And now with vSphere 8, it still already tells you, hey, it will be deprecated in the future. Be aware of that. And in vCF, it is already gone. So in vCF, you have no option to utilize another management than image-based management. It makes, from my perspective, it makes 100% sense, because vCenter is capable of having all of the related information about your hardware. So why do we still try to get an HP image or a Dell image or a Lenovo image? Hey, please use the download of the ESXi from VMware, from Broadcom. Use that image, because then we have a single image, and then we bring in the additional add-ons to our ESXis, and that's it. So that's the idea behind the image management.
So the next one, subscription-based licensing, that's a good one. People typically ask is like, why do I need to pick and choose that? The main reason is for subscription-based licensing, you actually have a cloud connector in there for some of the licensing, and that actually needs to be activated. Otherwise, you need to provide the license keys. So that is a difference. I'm honestly expecting that as we are now actually consolidating all these products into something more simple, that it's not going to be very many versions up until we have a very simplistic, here is your vCF enterprise license key for 500 cores. That's it. There is, and I'm not even sure if add-ons will really have dedicated license keys, or if they are just going to say it's a license order thing, because it does not necessarily always make any sense anymore. So that is why you have to pick and choose at the moment, whether it's subscription-based or not. I would expect the latest in 3 years, that button is going to go away.
Yeah, for sure. We have already this amount of message in the SDDC manager telling you, hey, I'm now capable of supporting you with subscription-based license. So maybe you will use it. But yeah, as you just mentioned, at the moment, we can already bring in, or we can also bring in license keys as well. The next one is have already a first technical decision, separate the VLAN from management, VMs, and ESXi VM kernel interfaces. Talking about having a dedicated management VLAN for your ESXi stuff, and having a dedicated management interface for your vCenters, SDDC manager, NSX managers, and stuff like this. So the typical deployment is to saying here, yes, I would like to have it, so that I can really separate my ESXis from my vCenter. Also there to have a hardware firewall in place. So this is clearly no story where we talk about NSX, because in the management cluster, NSX, yes, it is there, but it is not utilized for anything related to the management component. So there is no microsegmentation of my vCenter or microsegmentation of my ESXis. This is something clearly we need to do with our hardware firewall vendor of choice, saying, okay, what are the firewall rules inbound to my ESXis? What firewall rules do I need between my management network? So this is something where we can select, yes, I would like to have separated management, or I would like to have a consolidated management, so where my ESXIs and my vCenter, STDC manager, and so on, sitting in the same network. My personal opinion or my personal recommendation would be, please separate it.
I think it's something which we have learned over the last couple of years. Also, with the biggest threat from a disaster recovery perspective by now is cybercrime, and no longer that you actually that a storm or something like that is going to your data center, which always reminds me of that one class where my students actually in a design class decided that I have zombies in the data center. So that was a completely new challenge, but yeah, normally we don't have that. But again, as much as you can separate your networks, and we could invite maybe in one session at one point in time, Matthias, who actually was tasked once to do a DFW implementation on a management cluster, and he really liked it. So yeah, but moving along, host overlay network, IP addressing model. This is for the NSX piece then, whether you're going to utilize DHCP
or an IP pool, and also static. But static, to be honest, it is not really static assignment. Then you will utilize an IP pool defined in your NSX environment, and then the IP pool will be utilized to assign static IPs to your ESXIs. And there is also already one of the first pitfalls when it comes to stretched domain design, and where I maybe say, hey, okay, I will not be, or maybe I'm not capable of stretching all of my VLANs between my two data center sites. So there are a bunch of VLANs which needs to be stretched, otherwise it will not work. Talking about vSphere management network, talking about ESXi management network, vMotion can be layer 3, vSAN can be layer 3, NSX can be layer 2 or layer 3, but if we decide to go from an NSX, from an tunnel endpoint perspective, so for the overlay network, then we need to utilize DHCP, because otherwise my tunnel endpoints will not get any kind of IP addresses, because NSX is not capable of saying, hey, okay, I have 4 hosts where I should utilize IP pool number 1, and then I have 4 hosts where I should utilize IP pool number 2. So this is something which is critical when it comes to the part of stretch domain. When I go with a single site, yeah, whatever I would like to utilize.
Yeah, but just to be sure, the DHCP is not provided by any of the vCF components. Similar to what you said before, for the router, this is something, and I think this is important as we go through the different steps and the different areas for our audience and explain all of these decisions, is that we clearly mark out, even though that NSX could provide a DHCP server, it does not in this specific case. So this is something you need to put in place, otherwise your deployment will fail and you will actually redo a few things.
To be honest, no, it will not fail. It will work, but it will not work. So the deployment will run through, but then your NSX is not working. But yes, as I just mentioned before, DHCP is not part of the vCF deployment, so you need to have it up and running up front.
Okay, yeah. So the next one is the discussion we had from the earlier today. Are we going to plan for a consolidated management domain or not? I mean, in reality, I'm not sure, did it really change something in the deployment? I think the only change which you have with this is that it does not expect a workload domain from day one.
And so for now, those lines have gone red, because it is not expecting any kind of workload domain anymore. As long as we go here with an exclude, the spreadsheet is expecting an workload domain as well. And below, or maybe on one of the next tabs, there are some information related to the name of the resource pools for the management domain and stuff like this.
Yeah. Okay, and the last one on this one is
My beloved story.
I thought
Deploy-
that's typically Matthias' love story.
Yeah, Matthias will, if Matthias is now in something near of his computer, he will maybe drop immediately a message to say, hey, what are you talking here? No, just kidding. What I can do already from the beginning is saying, hey, yes, I have an external CA in my environment. I'm Windows CA, Linux CA, and I would like already from a starting point to utilize external certificates. But also this is something which I can change afterwards as well. So there is always the typically day 2 operations available in vCF where I can say, hey, I would like now to replace the certificates on my ESXIs, on my vCenters, on my NSX manager. So these are also the typically day 2 operations. To be honest, I haven't tested it with the already in the bring up process to utilize any kind of external certificates, because from my part it is much easier to bring up your management domain, and afterwards as in day 2 operations I will replace the certificates. But always, yes, we will replace the certificate, and please if we know it from Cloud Director in the past, VMware, and I expect that this is something which Broadcom will take over more and more, raises the bars for certificate stuff, to really have proper certificates, to have to not utilize the self-signed default installer certificates, because those are everywhere the same. So as long as you roll out in Cloud Director and vCenter and NSX Manager, and you work with the default installer certificate, which is embedded in the OVA, we all are using the same certificate at the moment, or mainly the same certificate.
You think that's a bad idea?
From a security perspective, maybe.
I think it's good, and it's important to cover these. I think it's overall by now people get used to the fact of certificate changes and everything else. I think one of the things which I really hope that the developers will get straight moving forward within VMware is that, especially instead of you still utilizing service accounts with username and passwords, that we get really to API tokens and stuff like that, because that is kind of a shocking scenario. I lately had a scenario with a service provider where basically their CISO says, it's like, if you have service accounts, that's your problem. But every 90 days, you're going to rotate all the passwords. If you have a larger scale Cloud Director environment, this is really fun. Because every 90 days, you're basically spending a lot of time to go through all of these different systems and manage and update and do all of that. And it's really not fun, which is something where vCF will become handy. But overall, it's getting more and more important to have these things in place, because I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was another article about larger corporations being hijacked from a vSphere perspective. Sadly enough, because of a security flaw which has been out for 6 months. So again, people need to take their own steps, and if they decide that they are not actually updating their systems, that has nothing. Again, it was one of these clickbait articles towards us like, hey, VMware is not making your system secure. It's like, no, if the issue is fixed, there is a patch available, and it's over 6 months, then it has nothing to do with the vendor. It's like, this is basically your own fault and the wrong setting of priorities. And in many cases, I'm actually feeling poor for most of the sysadmins in these corporations. Some sysadmins are actually not taking it serious enough, but there are also enough who actually are under the burden that everybody says everything else has a higher priority. And guess what? If a security incident happens, no one can basically look at that anymore, which is why I always tell every sysadmin and everybody out there, is like, whenever they get an order from their boss, it's like that anything before the security patches is more important to get that in writing. And print out that email so that you have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's interesting how quick people forget. But yeah, so I think it's like, because we are getting to the top of the hour already, and that was the plan for the first session. So just to give you all an idea, this is basically our plan for the next few sessions, is we will go through block by block by block by block through all these configuration sheets. We will try to somehow create on the webpage and in YouTube and everything else enough text and frame relations so that you can directly jump to the individual bits and pieces, so that if you are actually deploying vCF by yourself, you can actually directly jump into one of these areas and figure out what exactly was discussed for that specific topic, so that it becomes like a video reference or something like that. And that is really the idea. So it will take us quite a few episodes until we ever get to a console. But again, this is what we keep telling people when they want to learn vCF as well. So I saw the complaints so many times in the last couple of weeks on the internet is, yeah, we don't have FreeSCXI anymore. People can't train. People can't learn on these new technologies. It's like, even if you don't have potentially access to the portal, you most likely will somewhere get someone who can give you the Excel files or anything like that. With all of that, this is really like, if you know how to really work with these Excel spreadsheets and actually relate what you do in the Excel spreadsheet to your actual design and architecture, that's 90% of what you need already, at least for the deployment. Later operations is a different story. But at least from a deployment perspective, if you understand the consequences of all of this, if you understand how to translate business requirements into these Excel spreadsheets, that's key. Because that is what makes vCF.
I'm just have a look. Yeah, it is a bunch of, it is, I would say, 24 spreadsheets or tabs inside the spreadsheet. And the outcome, and this is always what I mentioned already in my videos. And yes, to be honest, at the moment that there is only the German series available, but the English one is starting maybe this week. And the most work at the moment is getting all of the necessary information, thinking about the necessary information, and then the deployment itself, or bringing over the information to the deployment Excel and start with the deployment of vCF. Okay, takes me half an hour, maybe an hour.
Yeah, and then you can walk away.
And then you can walk away, absolutely.
But again, so this is really the idea, and not every one of these fields, not every tab, not everything is actually going to take us that long. There is tons of baseline information where it's like, hey, this is an IP address. We are not going to explain to you what an IP address is and stuff like that.
Maybe the CIDR, but not the IP address.
Yeah, and what you should think about. But again, this is the plan for this format. Feel free to always also drop in comments and everything else. Next session, next time, we are going to directly continue where we left off and actually continue with the planning guide and stuff like that. And then, as said, we are going to go through it. We are going to try to make it as interactive from a link library perspective, so that you can directly jump to the individual components and bits and pieces. We hope to see many of you again for a first episode. I think at peak we had 11 people, which I was so. Which is for an immediate for a new starting series. I think this is great. I'm expecting and I'm hoping this will grow as it becomes more useful. But again, we will also put all the videos in the YouTube archive, so that you can keep them at a later point in time, because Twitch deletes them after 90 days, or 60 days, something like that. So that being said, I think this was a great first episode. I'm preparing for my next meeting, and Toby, you have your day more or less ends. Mine is still starting. We have a lot of meetings ahead of us still, and the next 2 days are going to be interesting. Expect a lot of videos on different social media channels from comdivision coming out in the next couple of days, with a lot of information we are going to be able to share. But again, up until then, have a great remainder of the week, and talk to you soon.
See you soon, and I will now start with VeloCloud SASE by VMware VeloCloud SASE. What is the new name?
I think just leave the VMware part out, and then you are fine. VeloCloud SASE by Broadcom, maybe?
By Symantec. By Symantec. There is already Symantec in the name. Guys, okay. See you in the next video.
Bye.
Bye.